Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to the 1.5 mile track at Chicagoland Speedway. We're going to be taking a look at lap times, setups, and discussion of the track and the AI at this track and all three of NASCAR's top series, from the trucks to Xfinity and then finally for the Monster Energy Cup Series. This is a very interesting track. And there's a lot to discuss about this particular track, so let's get to it. Before we get into the setup discussion itself, let's talk a little bit about the track and the AI and some lap times. We'll start off with the track itself. This is a track that can be run flat out very easily in all three series. The speeds vary quite a bit from the trucks all the way up to the Cup cars, but you can easily run it wide open regardless. This is a track that I have to run in order to get maximum speed. I basically have to treat it like a restrictor plate track. And what I mean is, since we are wide open, it becomes a battle of not scrubbing off speed. You try to maximize your top end speed, but then you try to maintain as much of that as possible through the corners. So I like to use wide arcs into the corners, and same thing coming off the corner, basically trying not to turn the steering wheel any more than I absolutely have to. That'll maintain the highest amount of speed and therefore get you the highest lap times. Now, the AI itself was very disappointing in NASCAR Heat 2, and unfortunately, it is much the same here in NASCAR Heat 3. I was a little bit excited for the Cup cars, but we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. For both the trucks and the Xfinity cars, the AI was very disappointing. With the lap times we'll be talking about shortly, I was able to easily get on the pole or very close, top 2 or 3, really very early on in my testing. So the AI are certainly not big on speed at this particular track in the trucks and Xfinity. Now the Cup cars with the AI are pretty good in qualifying. In fact, I don't think I've actually qualified on the pole for any of the races that I ran in testing. But I was generally in the top 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that range. It's fairly tight at the top. So for lap times, let's talk about lap times and then we'll move on to the setups themselves. Lap times for me in the trucks are somewhere around a 30.9. But if you're anywhere in the 31 flat to 31.1, probably even 31.2, you're going to be perfectly fine against the AI. So there's plenty of speed here. I stopped looking for speed, quite frankly, with both the trucks and the Xfinity cars because I didn't need it. I was easily outrunning the AI, so there was really no point in looking for more speed. In the Xfinity cars, anywhere from about a 30.1, 30.2, anywhere in there, and you will easily outrun the AI. So you can probably get away with 30.3s or 4s and still be perfectly fine against the AI. Again, they're very, very much off the pace for both the trucks and Xfinity. Now we get to the Cup cars. My quicker laps here, and in fact, if you want to get to the 105 speed rating, you're going to have to get below a 29 flat. You're going to have to get into the 28.9s, and that's what I was able to do. Again, you're going to have to drive basically a perfect lap here to get much below a 29-second lap, simply because it's all about maintaining maximum speed and scrubbing off the least amount possible. So anywhere in the 28.9s will get you to a 105 speed rating and also allow you to easily outrun the AI. Now, the AI is different for the Cup cars and is a lot better than it is with the other two series. And the Cup cars, they run anywhere. The fastest AI cars in the Cup division will run anywhere from 29.2s, 29.3s, somewhere in that range. So they're actually pretty fast. But once you find the speed and you can get down around, a 29 flat, 29.1, and of course, or even faster than that, you're going to have no trouble beating the AI. So with that said, let's move on into the setups. And the first thing I want to let you know is that we're going to be taking a look at something a little bit different. I use the same setup from the trucks to the Xfinity cars. Both of those are identical, with the only exception being grill tape. That's it. So we will not be looking at the Xfinity car itself. But then I'm going to be showing you something a little bit different for the Cup cars. Now, both types of setups will work perfectly fine, meaning that if you choose to use the setup that I'm showing you for the trucks and Xfinity in the Cup cars, it will work perfectly fine. And the same thing in reverse. If you use the setup I'm going to show you in the Cup cars in both the trucks and Xfinity, it will also work just fine. So a little bit different in some key areas, and we'll talk about why that is. So shock settings, the 3-5 ratio from bump to rebound is perfect for me at this track, like it is for most of the tracks, because it fits the way I want the car to feel. Moving on to the weight settings, 54.2 max left side weight because we're on an oval. And then we get to front weight and wedge. Both of these are at 52%. That is to both keep the car steady, because remember, we're running wide open around this place. So we need to keep the car very stable under us. We don't need the car to get really tight or really loose because that scrubs off speed. So in order to minimize the turning of the wheel, I need the car to be really stable, and 52% on both the front weight and the wedge do that for me. If you need the car to be a little bit more stable or a little bit tighter, if you're getting a little bit too loose, then one of the options you have is to increase the front weight and or increase the wedge. That will certainly tighten up the car and make it more stable. And of course, the opposite is also true. If you need the car to rotate a little bit more, then lower that wedge number. And if you need it to get into the corner a little bit looser and rotate a little better on corner entry, then lower that front weight number a little bit, and that should help you out. Spring settings, 1,200 pounds on the left front and 1,100 pounds on the right front. A little bit softer right front spring than the left front spring. And the reason for that is just to help the car rotate just a little bit with this setup on entry. That's it. If you feel like the car is rolling over on the right front a little bit too much on entry or getting a little too loose on corner entry, then increase that right front spring or decrease the left front spring. Either one of those should tighten up your entry. And of course, if you need to loosen up the entry, we already talked about the front weight adjustment that you can make by lowering it. You could also continue to lower the right front spring, and that should also help you out. In the rear of the car, 400 pounds and 500 pounds on the left rear and right rear spring, respectively. And the amount of rear springs overall that I use will be determined by how much I want the rear of the car to drive the car. If you like to drive the car off the right rear, then you're going to want to use bigger right rear spring and then a left rear spring to go along with that. And if you want the car to feel a little tighter and drive the car more off the right front tire, and then you're going to lower both of your rear springs in general. But 100 pounds of rear spring split seems to work really good. It keeps the car stable, but allows the car to rotate enough on the center of the corner and exit to really maintain the speed. But again, the name of the game when you're only using 100 pounds of rear spring split is to have the car be very stable. Okay, moving on to the tire pressures. You can do a lot of things with tire pressure in all three of the series to gain or lose speed, just depending on the feel of the car. I have chosen to go with 25 to 26 pounds on the left sides, anywhere from, say, 32 to 33 pounds on the right side seems to work just fine. You can get by with more air pressure, and sometimes it helps you gain a little bit of speed, but again, it's all down to the feel and the handling that you prefer. Miscellaneous settings were maximum front camber. Front sway bar is at 1.15 inches, which is pretty standard for me on the asphalt tracks. The left and right side track bars, both at 12 inches. That is to help the car to rotate. This is a very easy and quick adjustment, and also it's great because this is an adjustment you can make on a pit stop, whereas most of these things you cannot adjust on a pit stop. The track bar is something that you can adjust. So if you are a little bit too loose in the corners, then drop that track bar a little bit. Maybe try dropping it a full inch just so you can get an idea of how that changes the handling, and then you can go from there. Same thing if you are too tight, you need the car to rotate a little bit more. We've already talked about some other adjustments you can make there with the springs or the front weight or wedge or something. Another idea for that is to increase the track bar if you are a little tight and you need the car to rotate more. Increasing the track bar will do just that. Brake bias anywhere from 70 to about 75 is perfectly fine. You won't need the brakes unless you're in traffic. So really not much to worry about there. Grill tape, as long as you don't get the car overheating, it's not going to make any difference. So about 40% is perfectly fine and shouldn't press the issue too much on your oil temps. Wheel lock is at 10 degrees. I really want very fine control over the wheel here. Again, just because we're running wide open and we need to really focus on scrubbing the least amount of speed through the corners. And then finally, the steering offset is at 0.10. That is to offset all of the pull to the left that we get from using a large amount of front camber. So be careful with the steering offset. If you get this number too high, then the car will actually start to pull to the right on the straightaways, which can be very unsettling. Moving on to the gear settings. Didn't worry too much with first through fourth gear. It's really all about the rear end ratio for me. 3.25 seemed to work really well. You can get by with a 3.1 or even a 333 gear here, just depending on how many RPMs you want to run. I find that the car does not hold its speed as well when you get to the RPMs right around the rev limiter. So I like to back off just a little bit to try to maximize RPMs both in the center of the corner as well as at the end of the straightaway. So it's a balance there. And as always, your handling will change based on the RPMs that you're running. So the higher the number you use on the rear end ratio, that's going to make the car a little bit looser. It's going to want to rotate more through the corners because you're turning more RPMs. If you use a lower number like the 3.1 or so that I mentioned earlier, then that's going to make the car tighter through the corners because you're simply not turning as many RPMs. So again, to reiterate, this is the exact same setup that I use for both the trucks and Xfinity. So now let's move over to the Cup. All right, in the Cup cars, you're going to notice a lot of similarities between this setup when compared to the truck or Xfinity setup, but there's also some very noticeable differences and very important differences, and we're going to talk about that as we move along. But I just want to reiterate that if you want to try this particular setup in either the Xfinity or the trucks, it should work perfectly fine. I didn't really search for speed in the trucks or Xfinity because I didn't need to. I was easily outrunning the AI. I had the 105 speed rating, so I just simply moved on. When I got to the Cup cars, it was a little bit different. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the AI are much more competitive in the Cup cars, even though once you get around that 29 flat or better level, then the AI, you're simply going to run away from them. But they are a lot more competitive than they are in the trucks and Xfinity. So I was also forced to look for more speed here because that elusive 105 speed rating was hard to get. It was very elusive in the Cup cars. In fact, I had to invoke some Days of Thunder ideology here, where it looses fast and on the edge of out of control. Here, I had to find that edge. I had to find that knife edge of having the car on rails, meaning that it handles perfectly, but I had to make sure I was turning the steering wheel the minimum amount to get me through the corner because that maintains the maximum amount of speed. So I had to get the car right on the edge. I also mentioned when we were talking about setups a little bit earlier in this video, I mentioned the difference between a setup that drives the car off the right front as opposed to driving the car off the right rear tire. Now, if you're not familiar with that, it is a very different feel. When you get a car that rotates very well, particularly when you're under full throttle, then if the car is very free and rotates very well, you'll start to find yourself feeling the right rear more than the right front because the rear end wants to hang out a little bit more and you have to control that. That's where I'm at with the Cup car in particular because that's where I needed to be to find the speed. So keep that in mind. There are several things you can do to tighten up the car, and we'll talk about that as we move along, but I really did not want to tighten up the car. I wanted to get the car basically as free as I could get it without scrubbing off speed as a result. The shock settings, the 3-5 ratio works perfectly here, just like we saw earlier. But again, feel free to experiment with that. There are a couple of bumps. They're actually paving strips where they've put down fresh asphalt, and those patches can disrupt the car a little bit from time to time if you hit them just right. But other than that, there's really no bumps to speak of on the track, particularly none to worry about affecting your lap times or the handling of the car. So we move on to the weight settings. We want maximum left side weight. So no surprise there. We're on an oval. We want maximum left side weight. But then we get to the front weight and wedge, and that's where you're going to notice a difference there from what we saw earlier with the trucks or Xfinity. Using a lot more front weight here and even more wedge than what we were using earlier in the other cars. And that is simply to keep the car stable. And we're going to look at what I was using to increase the turn of the car here in just a second. But keep that in mind. The front weight using 54%, I actually believe 55% is the maximum front weight you can get by with, which is actually less than some of the teams use in real life. But 54% keeps the car stable on corner entry. One of the issues you have with a car that is very free is corner entry scrubs off a lot of speed if you're not careful. So I needed to make sure I had that under control, and 54% does that. 53% on the wedge controls the amount of rotation and the speed of the rotation of the car. Again, I wanted that to be slower so that I could maintain speed without getting too terribly loose. Now we move on to the biggest difference in the feel of the car from where we were in the trucks as opposed to where we are in the Cup cars. So at the front end, we have maximum 1,200 pounds on both the left front and the right front. I needed a little bit stiffer right front spring because you're running so fast, and I didn't want the car to start rolling over on the right front, particularly on entry of the corner, because that can get you loose. But the same principles still apply here. If you want to try out running a little bit softer right front spring to help the car rotate, then feel free to do so. It can certainly work for you. Just be aware that it's going to change the feel of the car. Moving on to the rear springs, that's where the difference came in. These rear springs are quite a bit stiffer than what I was using in the trucks and Xfinity. And the reason is I wanted the right rear to drive the car more than the right front because that's where I was going to get maximum speed. So 500 pounds in the left rear, 600 pounds in the right rear. If you're finding that the car wants to spin out, it's just too loose, and the rear of the car is driving the car just too much, then simply back off of both of the rear springs, and that will help out tremendously. You'll notice a huge difference going from 500 pounds and 600 pounds in the rear to something like, say, 350 and 450. A huge difference in the feel of the car, and I definitely recommend trying out something like that so you can get an idea of just how different it is and use that in the future to adjust your setups. Moving on to the tire settings, this is where I got really aggressive with the tire settings because I found that it kept making me faster. So 25 pounds on the left sides, but as always, there's plenty of adjustability there. Anywhere from 24 to 26 should work perfectly fine. And then 50 pounds, the maximum right side pressures on both the right front and the right rear. Again, that difference, that stagger between the left and the right side really helps the car to rotate and also seems to reduce the rolling resistance with the higher air pressure. So you get a little bit more speed out of the car. Now, it should not work that way, but in the game, it seems to. So we go with it. Miscellaneous settings, maximum front camber and the front sway bars at 1.15. No changes there. You'll notice that the track bar I've also kept around 12 inches. Again, very similar or the same to what I'm running in the trucks or Xfinity. And that's because I've used some other things to account for the rear spring difference that I'm using, namely the nose weight and the wedge. Moving back over to miscellaneous settings, the brake bias, again, 70 to 75%, anywhere in there I've had good luck with. And then grill tape, anywhere from 30, 35 should be perfectly fine and should not really present a problem for you. Wheel lock and steering offset, also identical. And then we see that the gear settings are also identical, that 3.25 rear end ratio. But as always, feel free to try to up that a little bit. I had great results running a 333 gear here. I also had great results running a 310 rear end ratio. So there's really a lot of adjustability, just depending on the feel you want for the car, which we talked about a little bit earlier on how you can use the rear end ratio to adjust that feel. So thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you can take some of these ideas and put them into your own Chicagoland setup. But again, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate all of the support you guys give this channel. It is very, very much appreciated. And stay tuned as we will continue our support for NASCAR Heat 3.